Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, it's Jack Edwards, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at defending the long ball. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're going to be looking at just a drill which is going to be quite basic, so breaking it down into just defending the long ball, so in terms of our movements, okay, and when we're stepping and when we're dropping. But before we get into it, let's have a look at how many players that I'm working with this week and the equipment that we'll be using. So in terms of players for this week, we're going to have 14 players in total, and it's all going to be outfield players, okay, so no goalkeepers. But if you do have goalkeepers and you want to add them to the session, that's fine. In certain areas of the session, we are doing small-sided games, which means that instead of using small-sided goals and end zones, you can use you can have goalkeepers with the proper goals instead. In terms of the equipment, we're just going to be focusing on balls, bibs and cones, and then if you don't have access to small-sided goals, you can then use poles instead, just to obviously make a goal out of them. And if you don't have them, you can just use cones instead. So, in terms of the setup for this part of the session, okay, the players are going to be split into pairs, okay? So, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be competing against each other. So, one player is going to be looking to clip over into the goal, okay, and the other player's trying to defend it, and then it'll be vice versa, going the opposite way. So in terms of the distance between the two players, that just depends on the age group that you work with. So younger players, it could be 20 yards, and then once you get into youth players and older players, can go from 30 onwards. It depends, because obviously if you want it to be quite a long ball, as if it's a switch of play, and it's a long ball upfield, you want it to test the players a little bit. So the distance between the players can be obviously working with the age group that you are, and then the distance between where the players start and the goal behind them can be between 5 and 10 yards, okay, and the player will always start by the cone or by the pole, so as if they're nearly touch tight, but then they're giving themselves the distance, so when that ball tries to get clipped over, they can clear it. If they get themselves in a good position, they can then look to chest the ball or bring the ball down. It could drop to their feet, and then they're looking to go back the opposite way. So you're focusing on not being too tight, okay, to the attack of the opposition player, so getting the distance. So then when the other players line up to play long, okay, our first thought is to look to drop, okay, to avoid the ball going over and into space. So what you could then do then is maybe put them into, split the groups again into like fours, and then the players can look to combine with each other, and they can look to clip over into and do a diagonal pass as well. So these two players might not know where the ball is going to come from, so these players could look to play across to each other. This player could then open out, but still though, we want this player to come just to shift over as if they would in a game, so then they can try and defend that long ball and get themselves back into clear it. You can try and do a point system for each team, so obviously every goal they concede, the other person will get a point, so the least goals conceded, the better for the players. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now moving into the first of our small-sided games. So we're focusing on defending balls, long balls in central areas, okay, so it's like a switch of play. So in terms of the setup for this part of the session, so the depth you can increase and decrease depending on how much space you want the players to be working in, and also with how many players that you've got and the age group that you're working with. So in terms of the central area here, that can just be between 5 and 10 yards, doesn't have to be too big. And then each end zone you want it to be 25 yards, just to give space to be able to for the ball to be clipped, okay? In terms of the width, okay, it can be 25 yards central, okay, and then it can be 10 yards either side, or it can even be less than 5 yards either side, depending again on the players that you make with and how much space that you've got. So you're going between 50 and 60 yards of depth, okay, and 35 and 40 yards of width. So we're going to have 2 teams of 5 plus 4 floaters. So the 4 floaters are on the outside, so they can clip the ball long, okay, so they're looking to help a team once they've actually got the ball in an area to score, but also help a team who's in possession be able to switch the play. So we've got 2 yellows and 3 yellows in here. The 3 yellows in here are going to be the defenders, okay? And the 2 yellows in here are going to be the attackers. Same with the blues, 3 blues in here, 2 blues in there. The greens are locked into their half, so 2 greens in a half, 2 greens in this half. So the coach will play the ball in to one of the teams. So the yellows in here trying to work the ball, okay? To then clip it long, they have to clip it long into here, okay? So if these yellows then gain possession of the long ball, what the blues are trying to do is then protect the goal, okay? So deflect away. So the yellows in here can combine to give themselves an overload so they can get passes in to try and score, okay? So the blues are trying to defend it. And then once they've defended, what they're looking to do is then drive into the middle, okay, to represent winning the ball back and stepping up the pitch. If they drive in, their team will then get the ball. If they defend it, okay, and the ball goes out for behind the goal or goes out wide, then the yellows will get it again, okay, for a certain amount of time, okay, but then if they lost it again, then the blues can get it. So it can be you either win the ball back and drive it into the end zone, okay, or obviously your team wins it back in here and scores, then it'll swap over, or you can win the ball back a certain amount of times, let's say 2 or 3 times, and then the play can switch over. So what we're focusing on though is that when we're seeing those long balls, we might be stepping up high here, okay. Once we see that the ball might be coming long, okay, we look to drop, okay. But with us having a spare player, we can see where the ball is. One player, we're thinking about, if there's one player short in here, we can have one player going a little bit tighter, one player on the cover and the other player protecting the space. So if that ball comes in there and goes over these 2 players' heads, this player can intercept the ball. Okay, so we're focusing on our positioning, okay, our ability to step as a team, hold our line, drop as a unit as well, and then getting bodies around the balls when that ball's coming into here, okay, we're not too spread out, so then if there is a second ball, okay, it's hard for us to get it, we're close to each other, so then if the ball drops, we can intercept it and then look to go forward. So then if they drive in, perfect, they get a goal. So then the blues will look to retain possession then, go the other way, the greens can have it, they look to then obviously get into a position where they can play long, yellows are looking to do the same, okay, so as you see we're coming over as a unit, the ball could get clipped in, and then we can put some pressure on. So we're pressing on there, we've got our players backing us up, so then if they look to turn, we can win the ball and drive into the space. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, now moving into the final part of this week's session, we're now moving into our second small-sided game, which is focusing on defending long balls, which are going to be going into wider areas. Okay, so we're focusing on the ball not being they can't be scoring in central areas. Okay, it's going to be in wider areas, so it's getting around the ball when it goes out there, supporting the fullback and the wide midfielders, getting bodies around the ball to win it back. So in terms of the depth for this part of the session, okay, again, it depends on the age group that you're working with. If you're working with the younger players, it can be quite tighter. If you're working with older players, you want to increase it so you can get more room to play that longer ball. So you're looking between 50 and 60 yards really for the depth. Obviously, the whole play is not going to be that the team's going to score from a long ball all the time, okay? It's just defending it in those areas, so setting up to defend against it. In terms of the width, we're going to go with 45 yards, okay, of total width. So it's going to be, in terms of the central area in here, this can be slightly smaller than the wide areas. So if you're going with 45 yards, you can kind of just have the wide areas between like 10 and 12 yards. So then you're looking for the wider areas in here, okay, to be just that little bit wider. So you're talking about between 15 and 17 yards. But if you wanted to, you could just make them all 15-yard areas. So the yellows are focusing on scoring in the small-sided goals in wide areas. If the blues win it back, okay, if they win it back quite deep, okay, they're looking to play through the wider goals here. If they win it back and they can go and attack here, they can do as well. So if they win it back quite high, they can go and attack further up the pitch. We don't want them obviously winning the ball here and going backwards. We want them to go forwards. So what it's focusing on is that, you know, we can still occupy central areas, okay, but we're trying to defend the long ball when it goes wide. So what we've got is a front three, 2 extra wide players and 2 midfielders, so they're looking to obviously be patient. They can look to clip it. So what we're focusing on then is in relation to the ball. So when the ball's out wide, okay, we're going to be coming across round into this area here. Our midfielders, we're staying compact, okay? So then if the ball is switched, okay, so we're going for a longer pass here, okay, we've got time to travel, we get across, we put pressure on the player who's receiving the ball, okay, and then we look to win it back, okay, so we're getting round the ball, so the ball might drop, can we get bodies round to win the second ball, and then can we look to play out of pressure to then play forward. So again, it's that communication side, so focusing on telling each other to step, telling each other to stop, telling each other to hold our position as well. Speaking about, if a player's making runs on the shoulders, if a player needs somebody else to screen a pass in front, put pressure on a player as well. It could be that the ball goes out wide here, and this player, if they've got pressure on them, okay, they'll go back, which is good. Then we can look to step up the pitch a little bit more. We don't want to drop too deep, okay? So then if we are inviting the long ball, it's played into a space where we can drop, win it, and get it clear. So when the Blues win it back, looking to play through one of the gates, when the opposite team's got possession, okay, be disciplined, be compact, but then obviously when the time is there to put pressure on the ball, so if the ball switches here, okay, this player can get out and put pressure on it. We all get across, okay, as a team, protect the space, so then if this player played inside and the player went to make a move on the overlap, okay, we can drop our position to then clear the ball. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to view all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.